It started with a scream, sharp, electric, unmistakably female. When Pat Benatar first appeared on MTV in 1981, in a black leather corset singing, "You Better Run," she didn't just perform. She detonated. Between 1979 and 1984, she sold over 35 million records worldwide, won 4 consecutive Grammy Awards, and became the first woman ever played on MTV. But behind the glitter, eyeliner, and raw vocals lay something the world wasn't ready to see: a woman punished for her own power. Pat was the face of sexual liberation on television, yet in real life, she was fighting a quiet war, against producers who sexualized her image, journalists who dissected her body more than her lyrics, and a media machine that made her an icon while quietly consuming her sanity. By 1985, the tabloids called her the rock goddess who used sex to sell rebellion. The truth? Pat Benatar never needed sex to sell anything. She had the voice of a banshee and the discipline of a soldier, but the camera only wanted her curves. She once said in a 1983 interview, "Every photo shoot felt like a battle. You wanted to be heard, but they only wanted you to be seen." Her songs, "Love is a Battlefield," "Sex as a Weapon," and "We Belong," weren't just hits. They were confessions, cries of resistance from inside a pop culture machine that blurred the line between empowerment and exploitation. But what happens when the industry that made you a legend also becomes your prison? When every headline about your body drowns out the voice that once moved millions? This is not just a story about fame. It's a story about how desire became a weapon, how media obsession rewrote a woman's legacy, and how Pat Benatar, the queen of MTV's golden era, paid the invisible price of being both powerful and female in a world addicted to sex and spectacle. And before it all faded, she left behind one haunting truth. They sold my image, and forgot my soul. Before the fire, there was silence. Patricia May Angievsky was born on January 10, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York, a city that knew how to build legends and break them just as fast. Her father was a sheet metal worker, her mother a beautician. The family moved to Lindenhurst, Long Island, where Pat grew up surrounded by the echoes of 1950s doo-wop and the quiet desperation of the American dream. At 8 years old, she was already performing at local churches. At 11, she was studying classical voice, dreaming of becoming an opera singer, not a rock star, not a sex symbol. Her natural range stretched nearly 3 octaves, a gift that would one day shake stadium walls. Teachers called her the disciplined one. She practiced for 4 hours a day, often until her throat bled. But real life wasn't an aria. At 19, she married her high school sweetheart, Dennis Benatar, and took his name, a decision that would later become her brand, her prison, and her myth. She worked as a bank teller by day and sang in smoky bars by night. By 1974, she was earning $2.50 per song, barely enough for rent. Everything changed one Halloween night in 1975, when she performed at a Manhattan nightclub dressed as a dominatrix, leather, fishnets, whip in hand. The crowd went wild. Within weeks, record executives were calling. The girl who once dreamed of opera had accidentally become the face of raw, female power. But that image came with a price. When Chrysalis Records signed her in 1978, they saw not a singer, but a product, a tough girl men can't control. Pat was told to turn up the sex, turn down the heart. Her debut album, In the Heat of the Night, released in 1979, sold over 1 million copies within a year. Success had arrived, brutal, seductive, and unstoppable. Behind the scenes, she felt it slipping. The music that had once been about emotion now felt like survival. She was no longer Patricia, the opera prodigy, she was Pat Benatar, the fantasy. And every night, under the burning stage lights, she asked herself, if this is power, why does it feel so much like being used? The year was 1979, and rock was a man's world, loud, leather-clad, and unapologetically masculine. Then came Pat Benatar. 5 feet tall, eyes like polished steel, voice like thunder. Her debut album, In the Heat of the Night, hit the Billboard charts like a grenade, peaking at number 12 and selling over 1 million copies in the US alone. But it was the second single, Heartbreaker, that changed everything, climbing to number 23 on Billboard Hot 100, blasting from car radios across America. By 1980, she wasn't just singing, she was commanding. Crimes of Passion, her sophomore album, went 4 times platinum, earning a Grammy for Best Female Rock Vocal Performance, the first of 4 consecutive wins. Her anthem, Hit Me With Your Best Shot, became a cultural earthquake, with over 1.2 million copies sold and countless radio spins. It was raw, sexual, and dangerously feminine, a declaration of war wrapped in melody. But the cameras loved her too much. When MTV launched in August 1981, Pat's You Better Run became the second video ever aired on the network, right after the Buggles video killed the radio star. Overnight, she was the face of a revolution. The leather pants, the glare, the power stance, it wasn't just music anymore, it was mythology. Tour after tour followed. Between 1980 and 1983, she performed over 300 shows, grossing more than $12 million worldwide. Fans called her the Queen of Rock. But offstage, she was drowning in exhaustion, press intrusion, and manipulation. Every interview demanded sex appeal, every headline asked the same question: is Pat Benatar too sexy for rock? The irony was brutal. While critics accused her of selling sex, she was quietly rewriting gender history. In 1982, her album Precious Time hit number 1 on Billboard 200, making her one of the few female rock artists ever to top that chart. By 1983, she had 8 top 40 hits, 4 platinum albums, and a marriage collapsing under the weight of fame. To the world, she was unstoppable. To herself, she was becoming someone else's creation, a mask built for the spotlight. And as the lights got brighter, the woman behind them began to fade. In her own words, years later, they wanted a rebel. I gave them one. But they never asked who she really was. By 1984, Pat Benatar had become more than a star, she was an empire. Her 4th album, Tropico, reached number 14 on Billboard 200, spawning the global hit, We Belong, a song that sold over 1.5 million copies and played on every radio station from Los Angeles to London. MTV crowned her the Queen of Visual Rock. But behind that crown lay a battlefield no one could see. Her videos became cinematic declarations of power, women in control, men on their knees, a voice that could burn down walls. Yet the more powerful she appeared, the lonelier she became. The industry that once worshipped her voice now wanted only her image. Stylists, photographers, executives, everyone had an opinion on how sexy Pat Benatar should look. In one Rolling Stone feature from 1985, a journalist described her like a weaponized Madonna, comparing her leather outfits to a dominatrix in mourning. The truth was quieter and darker. Her marriage to guitarist Neil Giraldo, once the creative heartbeat of her sound, began to fracture under the glare of fame. They argued through hotel walls, tour buses, and recording sessions. Between 1984 and 1988, they toured across 5 continents, performing over 400 concerts, yet spoke less and less. Every song became a coded conversation between love and war. Sex as a Weapon, released in 1985, wasn't a provocation, it was a confession. Tabloids twisted her lyrics into scandals. Rumors spread of affairs, breakdowns, secret feuds with other MTV divas. She denied them all, but the damage was done. By 1986, her album 7 the Hard Way underperformed, peaking only at number 26 on Billboard, and critics whispered that the Benatar era was fading. The press that once crowned her queen now called her a relic of rock's sexual rebellion. But Pat didn't fall quietly. In 1988, she took control of her image, moving toward blues and softer rock. Her compilation Best Shots went 5 times platinum in the US and Europe, proving she still owned the stage, just not the headlines. Through the 1990s, she released True Love, 1991, Gravity's Rainbow, 1993, and Inamorata, 1997. Each album was more personal, less commercial. Sales declined, but something else returned: peace. By 1995, the same woman once branded as a sex symbol stood before an audience of survivors, not fans. She had outlasted the machine. But the price was written in her eyes: the exhaustion of a woman who had given her youth, her privacy, and her voice to a world that only saw skin and sound. In the spotlight, she had everything. In the silence, she began to reclaim herself. By 1996, the lights dimmed. The world that once screamed her name had moved on, grunge had taken over, pop was reborn, and Pat Benatar's reign was quietly fading into nostalgia. Her album Inamorata, 1997, barely charted, selling just under 100,000 copies worldwide. MTV, the network she helped build, no longer played her videos. She had become what she once feared most, a ghost in the machine she created. Behind closed doors, Pat was fighting battles no chart could measure. Years of endless touring, interviews, and image control had taken their toll. The same woman who once sang "Love is a Battlefield" now found herself in one. Insomnia, panic attacks, and an unnamed sadness shadowed her days. In one 1998 interview, she admitted, "I woke up one morning and didn't recognize the person in the mirror. I wasn't the warrior anymore. I was just tired." Fame had been replaced by silence, and silence was brutal. When she walked into record label meetings, executives referred to her as classic rock, a euphemism for over. Her record sales, once in the millions, fell below 30,000 per release. Concert venues shrank from arenas of 20,000 people to theaters of 2,000. For the first time in 2 decades, she was not trending, she was disappearing. Yet, paradoxically, this fall became her reckoning. She stopped chasing radio hits and began writing again, not for charts, but for herself. Songs about regret, aging, identity, and the disillusionment of being an icon. The tone grew darker, stripped of gloss. She avoided the press for nearly 3 years, citing psychological exhaustion. Friends later revealed she went through a deep depressive episode around 2000, struggling with the fear that she was only relevant when sexualized. By 2003, her silence broke. On stage at a small venue in Phoenix, she told the crowd, "They took my fire and left me smoke. But I'm still breathing in it." It was not defiance, it was survival. While the media reduced her to a footnote of the MTV era, Pat quietly rebuilt her life with Neil Giraldo, focusing on family, writing, and charity work. She no longer needed to fight the machine. She had outlived it. But the scars remained, invisible, internal, eternal. The price of survival was no longer fame or money. It was learning to live after the noise. By 2006, the world had changed, but Pat Benatar was still standing. Her name, once whispered in arenas and flashing across MTV screens, now lived in the quiet corners of memory. Yet legends don't fade, they evolve. After a decade of silence, she returned to the stage, not as the pop icon of the 1980s, but as a survivor reclaiming her story. The tours started small, 1,500-seat theaters, intimate crowds, no pyrotechnics, no leather armor. Just the voice. That voice. The same fire that once sold over 36 million records worldwide, now cracked with age but heavy with truth. Fans cried when she sang "We Belong," no longer as an anthem of love, but of endurance. By 2010, she released her memoir Between a Heart and a Rock Place, a confessional masterpiece that stripped away every illusion. It revealed what the cameras never showed: the breakdowns behind the Grammy nights, the suffocating image control, the loneliness of being the strong woman in an industry built to break them. The book debuted at number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list, proving one thing: people still wanted to hear her, but this time, they were finally listening. Pat began speaking openly about mental health, sexism, and aging in rock. In interviews, she said, They told me rock was about rebellion. They never said it was about healing. Her words resonated with a new generation of women, from Pink to Lady Gaga, who cited her as an influence. Slowly, her name returned, not as nostalgia, but as legacy. In 2012, she and Neil Giraldo celebrated 30 years of marriage and 35 years of music together, performing more than 80 shows a year. Their bond, once strained by fame, had become their refuge. Her comeback wasn't explosive, it was deliberate, graceful, real. Then came 2022. After decades of waiting, Pat Benatar was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a recognition that should have come long before. She stood on that stage, tears in her eyes, holding Neil's hand, and said only one line that silenced the crowd. "It took them 40 years to let me in, but I've been here all along." The crowd roared. For once, the headlines weren't about her body, her age, or her image, they were about her voice. The same voice that survived every battle. The same voice that refused to die. By 2021, Pat Benatar no longer chased the spotlight, she had become one. No more record labels, no more stylized photo shoots, no more proving herself to anyone. The woman who once defined the sound of rebellion now lived quietly, surrounded by music, memories, and the peace she once thought impossible. The world had changed again, TikTok, algorithms, disposable fame, yet Pat's songs kept resurfacing. Love is a Battlefield trended in films, commercials, and Netflix soundtracks. Her catalog surpassed 1 billion total streams, and new generations, born decades after her rise, began to rediscover her. They didn't see the sex symbol the press created. They saw the fighter, the survivor, the voice that refused to break. In interviews, she spoke softly now, but her words cut deeper than ever. Fame was never the reward. Freedom was. It was a quiet revolution, the kind that doesn't need applause. She and Neil continued touring occasionally, not for the charts but for connection, a reminder that the music still breathes when the world listens. In 2023, she received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the She Rocks Foundation, honoring women who reshaped rock history. It wasn't just an award, it was an apology from an industry that had once tried to silence her. Pat's influence now runs like an invisible thread through modern music, from the unapologetic confidence of Pink, to the raw defiance of Lady Gaga, to the poetic sorrow of Florence Welch. Every woman who screams into a microphone without shame owes something to her. And yet, her greatest act was not the rebellion. It was survival. Today, at 72, Pat Benatar doesn't chase headlines, she writes them in hearts. Her voice, aged but undefeated, still echoes through darkened stages and car radios, reminding us that strength and softness can exist in the same breath. In her final words at the Rock Hall tribute, she said, "The fire never dies, it just learns to burn quietly. Fade to black. A single spotlight glows. Her laughter lingers in the silence, the sound of a woman who once fought the world, and finally won."